All right, so I say hello. I'd also like to say hello to anybody who happens to be watching on Zoom. I can't see you. I hope there's some people there. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to talk to you this evening. It's great to see some familiar faces. I haven't been at an HNC event for quite a few years now, so it's great to see some old friends here. So our trip. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with the Churchill, Hudson Bay area. You've probably been up there already to see the polar bears or for birding. It's great birding. Our trip was focused on the bears, but we did have some other interesting encounters, as you will see. Most of the photos in the presentation were taken by my husband, Dave, but I have included a few others that I grabbed off the internet just to illustrate one or two particular points. So just a quick geography refresher. Churchill is right on the southern tip of Hudson Bay, and it's a long way north. If you could drive there, it's about 1,700 miles from Winnipeg, if you could drive there. However, you can't because there are no roads. So it's either plane or train. As an alternative, you can drive as far as Thompson, which is in the middle of the country, which is 7 hours from Winnipeg, but then you've still got to get on either a plane or a train to get up to Churchill. So any which way you slice it, it's an awful long way away. The first thing you notice when you land in Churchill is the big signs emphasizing safety rules about the polar bears. They really don't like to lose tourists to the polar bears. So they're quite insistent about these rules. I mean, to the point that nobody locks their vehicle up there during the polar bear season. The theory being that if you happen to walk around a corner and meet a polar bear coming the other way, you can turn around and run and jump into the very first vehicle that you find as a sort of emergency refuge. So, you know, that's kind of a good thing. They're so serious about this, they even ban polar bear costumes for any sort of costume events. So Halloween or costume parties or anything like that. No polar bear costumes allowed, just so nobody causes an unexpected panic. Oh, point over there. So it's a long trip. We had to fly from here to Winnipeg and then Winnipeg to Churchill and then another small plane from Churchill out to the lodge. The company we traveled with have 3 separate lodges in different areas around the bottom part of Hudson Bay. We stayed at this one, which is called Nanook Polar Bear Lodge. You can see we flew from oh, it doesn't matter. We flew from, whoops. Oh, stay. We flew from Churchill. We had to fly back down to Nanook Polar Bear Lodge, which it's about an hour and a quarter or so. It's absolutely in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's sort of more than 200 miles from anything. So it's just a little plane, and Dave got to sit in the co-pilot seat, which was really cool. And this is coastal wetland. It's very flat, it's very wet. And a lot of it's willow bogs, so this is from the plane, so you can't really see it. We're a bit high up, but a lot of it is covered in these little willow bushes, which like the wet weather. That's pretty much what it looks like from above. Looks like that most of the time, except in the winter when it's covered in snow and ice. But it's just wet and boggy. There's a lot of snow geese up here. The snow geese love it. This again is taken from the plane, so we're looking down on a group of snow geese flying around. There's about 5 million snow geese nest in Canada's north at the moment, and their population is steadily increasing. So they're doing quite well. You do occasionally see a polar bear from the plane. We actually saw 6 of them en route, which was kind of unusual. This was the only one that we were in any sort of a position to get a photograph of. And again, it's taken from the plane looking down, so it's not a great photograph. But it was our first bear, so we were really quite excited about it all. So this was the lodge. As I say, the company has 3 lodges. They're all built on the same basis. They're intended to be very unobtrusive, blend into the landscape. They are literally in the middle of nowhere. You can see right at the back is Hudson Bay, and then just the wetland, and then the lodge, the sort of the gravel bit, that's the little runway for the plane. The lodges are all built in a compound, and they have a big, heavy-duty, tall wire fence around them, and even some electrical fencing in some parts. The idea of it is to keep out the wildlife, and in particular the bears. Although they do say that it's actually pretty much impossible to build a fence that is totally bear-proof. If you think about it, an adult male polar bear can be as tall as 13 feet if he stands up on his hind legs, and weigh a maximum of about 2,200 pounds. So, you know, if he was really determined, it probably wouldn't matter what kind of fence you had, he's going to find his way in. This has never happened in the company's history. We were pleased to hear. They've got the coolest logo. I just love that logo. That's the name of the company, Churchill Wild. So as soon as we arrived, we kind of went in the front door, went to look out the windows at the back, and there was a shrike on a tree, quite a way away, and we didn't have the cameras organized and everything, so this is just a very quick snap, but it was sort of encouraging. He was sitting on that tree, and he was hunting from there. He kept flying off and grabbing something and going back. So we just felt that that was sort of a good omen. So we had a quick lunch, and then we were setting off to go for our first drive. First thing we saw was a bald eagle. There's quite a few bald eagles up there. Bald eagles, they have no natural predators as an adult. They're killed by collisions with things, collisions with vehicles, with power lines, and in particular with wind turbines, which are apparently cause they're a big sort of predator of the eagles. The most common predator is man, by either shooting or poisoning. Bald eagles tend to be bigger, so the further north you go, the bigger they are. They became virtually extinct in the US in the late 20th century. Their population has since recovered. They have recently been removed from the list of threatened species, although it's still illegal in the US to own any part of an eagle, either a bald eagle or a golden eagle, apparently. So like I said, flat and wet. Depending on the weather, they're either damp or sopping wet. It's just, you know, it's just a degree, and mud everywhere. So we were driving along and went round a corner, and somebody said, this is way off in the distance, big telephoto lens, but it's kind of, oh, look, oh, wow, there's a wolf, you know, which is really cool. And then we realized, actually, there's two of them. And we stayed around for a while. We actually got out, and we were actually walking on the land with these guys, and they were pretty much that close. Wolves howl for communication purposes. They howl, you know, for all kinds of reasons, to keep in contact with each other, to keep in contact with the pack, they will let, if one part of the pack makes a kill, they'll call the rest of the pack to come to feed, and so on. So they were, it was really actually cool to be standing that close to them and hearing that, you know, we've all heard on movies and things, the wolves howling in the distance, to be right there when they're doing it. It was really, it kind of sells a bit of a thrill down the back of your neck. They were very curious about us. These are grey wolves. They may look a bit like a German Shepherd, but they're actually quite different. They have different and additional teeth, which are designed specifically to help them tear meat from their bones. And their bite is extremely strong. It's more than twice the power of a German Shepherd or even a pit bull. Wolves are only distantly related to coyotes. One of the biggest differences is that wolves are pack hunters. Coyotes are not. Coyotes typically hunt as an individual. Occasionally, a mated pair may kind of loosely hunt together, but typically the coyotes hunt individually, which is the biggest difference between the two of them. They have been known to interbreed, wolves and coyotes. You've probably heard the coy wolf, for example. Scientists are not really happy about this. They figure it poses a long-term threat to the genetic integrity of both species. They would prefer they wouldn't do it. I'm not quite sure how they intend to stop it. Canada geese are everywhere. Canada geese are everywhere in the world. You know, we've traveled to a lot of different countries around the world over the years, and I swear that we have seen them absolutely everywhere. The only place I haven't seen them is Antarctica. But everywhere else, if you find a little bit of water and you spend 5 minutes there, you bet round the corner will come a Canada goose. Up there, you tend to find them in flocks of a combination. Most commonly, the Canada goose, the snow goose, and the blue morph. The one with the sort of dark grey body and the white head is the blue morph of the snow goose. And most of the big flocks up there are some combination of the three. This is not our picture. Moose are quite common up here, and we did see some, but they're very difficult to get a decent photograph of. They're very shy. They tend to spend a lot of their time in the willow bogs. So you might just kind of see the top of their back or maybe an antler. They're not particularly interested in coming out and posing for a photograph. You know, a moose with antlers has better hearing than a moose without. Although they shed their antlers every year, but while they have them, the hearing is better because their antlers act like a parabolic antenna and really improve the hearing while they're bearing them. And the older they get, as they get more mature, the bulls have more points on the antlers until they start to get really old, and then that process kind of reverses and gradually they get less and less points on the antlers. These antlers are quite heavy. A typical pair is, you know, 25 to 30 pounds, but they've been known to weigh up to 75 pounds for a rack of antlers. That's a big weight to be carrying around on your head, isn't it? They're not normally aggressive, but they have very poor eyesight. And so at certain times of the year, particularly, they can be more aggressive. They can be startled into attacking, particularly during the mating season, during the rut. The adults are very sort of edgy. And if it's a female protecting a young calf, then she can very easily be startled into charging at you. And you can't outrun a moose, so there's not much point in trying. They can hit speeds of 35 miles an hour, which is faster than most of us can run anyway. So the experts tell you that if a moose starts to charge you, try and find something big to get between you and it, like a big rock or a heavy, sturdy tree, you know, a vehicle, a building, anything that will take the brunt of that charge. I know some of you have been wondering about the rhinos. You're going to be disappointed. Here they are. So this company, Churchill Wild, they needed something to comfortably take their tourists about, and there was nothing that really worked very well. So the owner of the company designed these himself and had them built, and there's just two. So these are unique, and they are perfect for this environment. I'll have some more pictures of them as well. They have 8-wheel drive, so each wheel is driven independently. They have all kinds of other fancy engineering, I'm sure, that I don't understand and can't explain. But they can go through anything. They mud, water, go over rocks. They never get stuck, and they're very comfortable. We saw these guys again. So this is a bit later on in the afternoon. This is a group of almost adult pups. They called them pups, but they're virtually fully grown adults. And they were learning to be independent. So this particular pack has actually a group of 6 this year pups, and we saw 4 of them several times. They were out exploring, you know, learning the skills they need as an adult. And they start off usually, you know, they spend an hour or 2 away from the pack, and then that gradually grows, and then they'll spend several days away from the pack, always howling to keep in contact. But, you know, at the end of the day, they're still babies. They spent all their time playing and chasing and, you know, rousting about with each other. But of course, all of that is teaching them life skills. They were very curious about us. They were coming quite close. Again, we were out on the ground now with these guys, and they were really interested in us and in the rhinos we were in. They've probably never seen humans before, so it was kind of, my goodness, what is this? They were just, they were just really interested. This was something unknown to them, and they were keen to try and learn some more about it. And apart from anything else, they're so photogenic, and I just love these. Sorry for all the photos. But yeah, they were not afraid of us at all, but wary. Yeah, I'm not sure my cats would appreciate him. So again, this is kind of what it was like every day. These are all the willow bogs I've been talking about. Willows love wetland. They grow to about, well, maybe head height on a person. So they're great, and it's very thick and dense, very difficult to get through. They make great hiding place for a lot of the other critters up there, you know, and the moose and the caribou and all the smaller things. And this is a trail. This is actually a really good trail. This is one of the best ones. That's more like what it's like. Every vehicle that's up there now has to stick to the existing trails. These trails were originally made by the Canadian Forces when they were up there training years and years ago. And of course, they did a lot of damage to the environment. So now the tourist vehicles they must stick to the existing trails. They're not allowed to get off, and you know, you might think it's, you know, if you went over there it might be a bit drier. Not allowed to do that. They can't make any new trails. You have to stick to what exists. And they are extremely muddy. And again, on wet days, you can imagine what it gets like. Quite often see bear tracks in the trails. A fresh one. This was a black bear, very fresh. He was obviously either, you know, just in front of us somewhere or had just passed through. If it had been a polar bear, it would have been way bigger than that. But you do sometimes see polar bear tracks on these trails. And being up high, we got some great pictures of the birds flying past, because they'd be taking off and just coming past. And with a telephoto lens, we were able to get some fabulous pictures. Again, that gives you a bit more idea of what you're doing with these, where we're going with these rhinos. They can go through mud way over the axles, water up to about thigh high on a person, big rocks, they go through rivers and so on. They're just amazing. We didn't get stuck anywhere the entire time we were there. And again, that kind of shows you what it's like. There's sort of 2 cars to each vehicle, all independent, you know, so one will be tipping this way and the other one's tipping that way, you know. It's quite exciting, actually. There was a black bear, came by to visit on a regular basis. He came every day, and he seemed to have a trail that he followed. So he would come up at the left of the lodge and then would walk. This is the big fence that we talked about. We weren't allowed, if there was any creature out there, we had to stay well away from the fence. We weren't allowed to get close. But he would walk along the back, and he wasn't at all afraid of us. He was just curious. I mean, this was his walk, so he'd probably, every time there were tourists there, he came by to visit, I suppose, and check us out. But he would walk by and he would stop and look and sniff and do, and then he would just sort of wander off and disappear into the trees on the other side of the compound. And you do get beautiful sunsets up there, particularly on the, you know, if there's a little bit of cloud around, it really could be quite spectacular. And not only the sunsets, we also got the northern lights. They told us when we first arrived, they asked us, okay, like, we don't know what time the lights might come out, if they come out at all. Do you care? Like, if they're in the middle of the night, do you want us to come and wake you up so you can go out and see them? And we said, oh yeah, absolutely. So this first night, it was about 2:30 in the morning. They came tapping on the door and said, okay, guys, the lights are here if you're interested. So we all just, grabbed our coats and camera and headed out there. You can see we're kind of quite high up. There was an observation tower at the end of the lodge, so we shot up there and managed to get a few pictures. They really are quite spectacular. I'm sure some of you have seen them, but they really are. It's quite an eerie feeling to be there with the lights above you. The next night, they were more obliging. They had a fire pit there. It was a sort of a big metal cauldron on a tripod, and they would light it after supper. So we're out there at sort of 8:30, 9 o'clock, and just nicely got out there and you sit around and chat, and the lights came out. So that was actually better timing. It was quite obliging of them that particular night. So clear. It has to be clear for the north to be able to see the northern lights, but of course there's no light pollution at all up there. So it's amazing. I see all the stars and all the constellations. It was it really was quite spectacular. So the next day we were planning to get up and have breakfast and then head out, and then he came knocking on the door about 6 o'clock in the morning and said, okay guys, if you care, there's a bear just across the way here. We thought we're going to go and see if we could get a picture of him. So we all, there he was, out in the water. So he said, okay, we'll be back for breakfast, grabbed our cameras and headed off to see if we could get some photos of him. He was very, very far away. Again, this is taken with a big telephoto lens, and then we've blown the picture up as well. He was a little dot in the distance, in actual fact, and not at all interested in having his picture taken. He didn't seem to care about us. He just stayed out in the water. He didn't even pay attention to us. I mean, he was just, I'm doing this, whatever, which was fine, but not very photo cooperative. So he stayed out there and we stayed on the land, and eventually we had to give it up as a bad job because he obviously wasn't going to come any closer. Bears are terrific swimmers. This is not my photograph. I wish. They're as much at home in the water as on the land. Although they're the largest land predator, they spend most of the time at sea or on the ice, and they're superbly adapted for that. They hunt mostly the seals out from the ice, and they've been known to swim for days. One bear was recorded, it was out in the water for over a week, and they just keep swimming. Their front paws are huge and they act like paddles, and then their back feet, they trail behind them and they act like a rudder, so they can just do this. And they have really thick layer of blubber and a specialized fur pelt to keep them warm. And they float. I mean, if they get tired, they just turn on their back and they'll float in the water and snooze for a bit. And they don't seem to be at all uncomfortable in the water. You can see the big, again, not my picture, huge, huge paws. There is a strong movement right now within the scientific community to actually reclassify polar bears. We talk about them as being a land predator. They want to reclassify them as a sea mammal, kind of like a whale. I don't know. I don't know if that'll go anywhere. It would seem kind of odd to me to call a bear a sea mammal, but who knows? So we went back for breakfast and then set off again. This is a different guy. After we'd driven around for a bit, he was having a snooze. It is very, very difficult to find these bears up there. Despite what you see on TV or in photo books, polar bears are solitary creatures, and there's a very small number in a very large area. So finding them is very much a needle in a haystack thing. Those documentaries you see, and the fancy coffee table books full of photos, they probably took 10 to 15 years of photography and filming to reach that end product. So just being out there for a few days, trying to find one, it's kind of good luck with that. They don't have a territory. They just wander wherever the mood takes them. And they've got a huge area. Around Hudson Bay, there's about 350,000 square miles where you might find a bear. And so trying to find one. Tourists are only allowed in a very small area. It's called the Churchill Wildlife Management Area, and it's only 1% of that total. That's still 3,500 square miles, with perhaps one bear in it, if you're lucky. So it is a challenge. The only time you can be reasonably sure is right at or beside Churchill, in that couple of months when the sea ice is just starting to reform, and they do tend to gather a little bit there. But typically, they remain very aloof and isolated. We were out on this company that we travel with. It's unique in the world. It actually does take you out walking on the land with the polar bears. You're not allowed to get too close, and there's all sorts of rules. And then, of course, the bear makes up his own rules as you go. So we did get out, and we were trying to get close to this guy. You have to walk. The rules are you walk behind the guide. So the guide walks towards the bear, and very slowly, very quietly, and he always walks in a zigzag pattern, always from upwind, so to give the bear plenty of time to see you, to smell you, and to decide whether or not he's comfortable with you getting any closer, or whether he wants nothing to do with you. You know, these bears, they've likely never seen a human being before. Just because we might have seen this bear that particular day, tourists coming, a couple of days from now, this bear could be miles away and never see another human again. So they never become habituated to people, so they are extremely wary. It really is an incredible feeling, though, to be out there walking with them, The whole idea of walking with them, the guides are highly trained, very, very experienced specialists, and they understand bear body language. They know when it's safe to get a little bit closer, and more importantly, they know when it's time to back off. And they carry a number of deterrents with them in the event of any show of aggression. And those deterrents vary and escalate in power. I mean, it starts just with the voice. If a bear does look like it's maybe starting to approach you, the guys will just kind of say, okay, bear, back off, enough. If that doesn't work, then they'll get a bit more loud. They might yell at them, okay, enough, leave us alone. Beyond that, the next thing they do, they always carry a pocket full of little pebbles, they've picked up off the beach or whatever, and they'll take some of that and they click them together. And that might not sound like much, but remember, these bears live in a virtually silent world. All they ever hear are the birds and the water. That's it. There's nothing else there. So stones clicking together, they've probably never heard it before, and they have no idea what it is, and they find it very disturbing. And 9 times out of 10, that's sufficient to turn them around. Beyond that, they will throw the stones. If the bear still keeps coming, they'll throw the stones in front of it to land on the ground, and then next step is to actually throw them and hit the bear on the side. I mean, you can't possibly hurt them, but this bear's never experienced this before. It has no idea what this is all about, and it will say, hey, I'm out of here. Beyond that, it gets a bit more serious. They carry bear spray, they carry noisemakers, and they carry shotguns. They would fire a shot in the air, and an absolute last resort, they would shoot the bear. But that only ever would be in the case of an absolute life or death situation. It's never happened. These people have never done anything more than throw stones towards the bears. That's the most serious step they've ever had to take. But this guy, he just wasn't sure about us. He would walk a few steps, and he would stop, and he would look back. I don't know, what do I think? Am I comfortable? Well, maybe not. Oh, they're still coming. I'll go a bit further away. He just didn't really like us being there. So, again, we left him to it. Again, we were a long way away from this guy. These are telephoto lenses. They look a lot closer than we really were. The bears spend most of their life out at sea, as you know. They're hunting the seals. They come ashore around when the ice melts, which is usually July or August, and then they don't go back out until the ice reforms in kind of October, November. And during that time on land, they fast. They don't eat at all. So they have to make sure that they build up as much of a fat layer as they can while they are hunting to see them through this fast of this short summer. Not my picture, but you sometimes do see pictures of them lying around on the snow. This is usually to cool off. They have extremely effective insulation, and so they do get very warm very easily, and they'll quite often you'll see them lying around in the snow. It's just to cool off. They have cooling glands in their armpits, for want of a better word, in both their front legs and their back legs. Sometimes you'll see them actually sort of, spread-eagled on their front in the snow, and it's just a cooling mechanism to help them dissipate that extra heat. They have an incredible sense of smell. They can smell food from 20 miles away, and they can smell a seal under 3 feet of ice from a mile away. Consequently, the guides were very serious when they told us not to carry any food at all while we were out walking with the bears, because it's definitely not a good idea to give a bear the idea that a human needs food. An interesting fact about polar bears is that, and food, humans really can't eat polar bear meat. The polar bear meat has some sort of bacterium in it, which is poisonous to humans. So generally speaking, you don't want to be eating polar bear meat. But as one separate thing from that is that the First Nations people have actually evolved a way of not being subject to that poison. So they are actually the only people who can safely eat polar bear meat if they wanted to. I was told that they actually wouldn't want to because it's not actually very nice and it doesn't taste of anything. So, it would have to be a real last resort if they were going to eat them. It's always been understood that the bears hunt the seals. I mean, that's what we all think. But in very recent times, polar bears have actually been observed hunting the geese. I told you there are huge flocks of geese there. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of geese there all the time. And the polar bears have actually been observed hunting and successfully catching geese. It's a very tricky exercise because the geese, they're in huge flocks and they always have sort of guard birds around the outside whose job is just to watch for predators. So it's not an easy task, but they are learning to do this. So this is a whole new behavior that they have picked up from somewhere, and they're teaching each other how to do this. We did come across a mother and a cub later on. Again, these are taken from a long way away. A female bear can become pregnant once every 3 years. And once she's pregnant, that first winter, she doesn't go back out onto the ice. She makes a den usually in the snow or the ice, and semi-hibernates there, and that's when the babies are born, actually in that snow den. They typically have twins, although they have been known to have up to 4 babies. Although raising 4 to maturity would be very unusual. The mother is very protective, and you can see from these pictures, I mean, even though we were a long, long way away, these were actually really just a little dot on the horizon. She's not at all comfortable. She's not letting us get anywhere close. Up here, she's got her nose up, she's sniffing, trying to figure out what we are, what kind of a risk we are to the baby. She almost all the time, she's either really close to the baby or puts herself between what she perceives as a risk and the baby. She was not at all happy having us there. So we left them to their travels. Again, not my pictures, but they do illustrate a point. The females are wonderful mothers. The cubs stay with the mother for 2.5 years. She's very affectionate. You see these pictures all the time, but apparently this is what you see. They make a very affectionate family group. And she defends her babies to the death if necessary. The only predator, I mean, the adult doesn't have any predators, but for the babies, wolf packs will sometimes take the babies. The odd male, sometimes a male bear will attack the baby of a different family, and then humans. But they're so photogenic, and they look so cuddly. They're not. So are they endangered? Well, it seems to depend really on who you talk to and what you read. I won't go through all of that, but they figure there's about 30,000 polar bears in the world today. They're divided into 19 subregions or subpopulations. 60 to 80% of all polar bears are found in Canada. And you can see all the different countries. To some extent, in every country, they have some degree of concern assigned to them. This was just a kind of an interesting map. It's taken from above, as if you were kind of in a drone looking down on the North Pole, if you will. The news isn't quite as bad as a lot of the alarmist stories that we see in the press recently. Some of the populations have held steady over about the last 20 years, and there's a couple of them that are even going up a little bit. So you can see the red areas, which includes Hudson Bay, where we were, are actually declining. The blue ones are holding steady, and the two green ones are actually have increased a little bit. All the rest, the gray, literally the grey area, there's not enough data to form any sort of opinion on. So, you know, the news isn't quite as bad as you might have thought it was, but it's not great. I'm not going to read all that, but the key thing is that the big unknown is global warming. The bears absolutely depend on the sea ice, and if there's no sea ice, there will be no polar bears. And at the moment, scientists are predicting that by the year 2050, the polar bear population will decline by 30%, which is a very sad statistic. And just a few fun facts. Again, I won't read them all. I talked about how big their big paws, the size of a dinner plate. You know, bears look cute and cuddly, but you really do not want to be hit across the backside by one of those guys. They have 4 inches of blubber under the skin, which is what helps keep them warm. And their skin is black, so that helps to absorb any warmth that there is in the air. The black skin helps to absorb it. And their fur, although it looks white to us, it's actually transparent. It's a trick of our eye and the brain and the effect of light that makes it look white, but it really isn't. It's transparent. And they have a blue tongue. I don't know why. Couldn't find out. We saw our black bear friend again, just passing by. We did see some caribou, but again, there's quite a lot of them up there, but they're very difficult to find and certainly to photograph. They like the willow bogs. They'll spend a lot of time hidden in the willow bogs. And makes them practically invisible. Interesting thing about caribou, in Canada and the US, in Alaska, they're called caribou. The ones found in Russia and Scandinavia are called reindeer. They're also, they're very closely related. They're not quite entirely the same species, but really close. They're also found in Europe. In Europe, they call them elk. But they're not a bit like our elk that we have here in North America. So if somebody says they've seen an elk, you know, you really have to find out where they are before you can figure out what they actually saw. Caribou are the top terrestrial migratory mammal in the world, even more so than the wildebeest. We've all seen photos, documentaries of, you know, the big migrations of the wildebeest across the African savanna. We actually, our caribou migrating through the north are actually, it's a bigger event, but we don't tend to realize that. Another quick little interesting factoid, all reindeer or caribou have antlers, both the male and the female, and they all lose them each year and then regrow them. The males lose theirs in the fall. After the mating season, after the rut, they will drop their antlers, and they don't regrow them until the following spring. On the other hand, the females, they keep their antlers right through the winter and into the spring until after they've calved the following spring. The thinking is that it's an evolutionary change to help the female perhaps protect her newborn calf. So they have their antlers right through the winter, which raises an interesting question about Santa's reindeer, because, you know, they all have antlers and they've all got male names, but they must all be female. So much for Rudolph. This was a little cove that we came across, and rumor has it that this is where Henry Hudson spent his first winter. Henry Hudson was an English explorer. He was looking for the inside passage. He was convinced there was a way to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific without having to, try and kind of go up round through past the North Pole. He was sure that there was a sort of an inland way through. And eventually, he'd made his way into Hudson Bay, and this was in the early 1600s. He got really excited and he thought, this is it, I'm onto something. And he was wanting to keep going. But by this time, he'd been away for months and years, and his crew had had enough. They were sick of it. They said, no, we're going home. So they mutinied, and they turfed him off the ship. They put him and his small son in a little boat and sent them off, and they turned around and sailed back to England. And it's rumored that Henry Hudson and his son actually made it into this little cove, and there was a sort of a nice, a grassy cove and trees for shelter and so on. And it's said that he spent his first winter here with his son. Nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows whatever happened to Henry Hudson. His body has never been found. There are a lot of legends about him in the First Nations people, about their ancestors having spent time with Henry Hudson, but nobody knows for sure. There's nothing definitive. So time to head off. And we again came across the wolves. This time they were in the berry bushes. There's a lot of sort of low bush berries up there, things like bearberries and cranberries and strawberries and some other ones. The bushes are very low and they're thick growing and lots of thorns and stuff on them. And but the pups seemed to really enjoy them. They would get right in there. Sometimes the only way you'd know there was anybody in there was you maybe see them moving a bit, or you'd see the tip of a tail or the odd ear would poke up. But they were really enjoying these. You can see some of the little berries down there. These are grey wolves, and they were very curious about us. They came really close. They always keep an escape route handy. They never let themselves be trapped sort of in an area. They always have one eye out for how they're going to get away if they have to. The pack's always led by the current breeding pair of adults. So a pack consists of the current breeding pair, this year's litter that they've had, and then some of perhaps the previous year's breeding pairs, or some of the sort of semi-adults from a previous year. Anywhere from 3 to 30 typically in a pack. The grey wolf was once the most widely distributed mammal on the planet, and that changed when humans showed up and started becoming more nomadic. As people started moving around, it started to drive the wolves off their traditional grounds, and they're losing they were actually losing their habitat. Grey wolves are now found only in kind of the northern climes of the world, primarily Canada and Russia. They have a big territory, usually something like around 1,500 square kilometers, and they travel it widely, so they tend to be always on the move. They think there's about 250,000 individual grey wolves left in the world today, mostly in Canada and Russia, and 85% of all North American wolves are in Canada. The main threat to their survival is actually human persecution. Humans exaggerate the threat of the wolves to livestock and to humans. There's very few recorded instances of them causing damage in either of those instances, because the wolves aren't interested in being near human population. And of course, loss of habitat is another threat to their survival. They're not considered threatened today, although it does have protected status in some places. There are some reintroduction programs underway. There's a famous one in Yellowstone Park, for instance, because scientists have figured that a healthy wolf population translates into a healthy wildlife environment. The wolves hunt, and they will typically hunt and take the injured, the elderly of a herd of caribou or whatever, leaving the healthiest animals to continue that population. So a healthy wolf population is good for everything. Black bear, back again. The black bear population is very healthy. The black bear is found in every Canadian province except PEI. It's in 41 US states and in Mexico. And so it's, it seems to be doing quite well. This was a typical river. The rivers are there tend to be very shallow. I mean, we would go through in the Rhinos, but we'd wade through some of them. We got our knee-high rubber boots on, and we'd just paddle through them. Not a problem. It was beautiful weather when we were there most of the time. It was, 18, 19 degrees. Just great. Not kind of what you think about being up north. And we found a very unusual, actual little dry spot. And we thought, you know what? Let's have a picnic. So we had a barbecue, which was kind of cool. We saw quite a lot of short-eared owls. They hunt during the day as well as at night. There were, we saw quite a few species of the hunting birds. We've already seen the bald eagle, and this is the owl. We also saw merlin, we saw harriers, and peregrines. Didn't get any pictures of those. And snow geese. You can always find snow geese. They're everywhere. Snow geese, unlike the Canada goose, which grazes on short grass, the snow geese actually dig down and eat the roots and rhizomes of the plants. So snow geese actually have a serrated beak, which has evolved specifically to allow them to dig down into the mud and the dirt and kind of chew off the roots that they feed on. Evening draws in. It's quite early nights. The evening comes quite quickly. We just had time for a quick visit to this beach, which was not far from the lodge. There's a lot of fossils being found around Hudson Bay. 445 million years ago, this was a shallow coastal sea, and some of the oldest fossils in the world have been found on the northeast shores of Hudson Bay. Some of them were between 3.7 and 4.3 billion years old. The land in the Canadian North is actually rising. It's due to a phenomenon called, I have to read this, post-glacial rebound or isostatic rebound. And it's the rise of the land after the removal of the huge waste of the glaciers from the last ice age. So as the ice sheets were there and they pressed down on the land and they forced it down, and as the ice retreated and melted, the land is now rebounding. So it's kind of like a sponge. If you take a sponge and put it in a bowl of water and press down on it, the sponge goes really flat and it's sopping wet and soaked and so on. But if you take your hand away and let the water drain out, the sponge rises back up again. And that's exactly what's happening to the land in the north. Around Hudson Bay, it's rising at a speed of about 1 centimeter a year, a meter a century. And nobody actually knows, none of us will see it, but nobody knows how long that will continue or how high it might rise. But that was basically it. It was time to go back to Churchill. So a little plane came to pick us up. And actually, the day we left, the weather turned what you might think of as more normal. It was cold, it was windy, it was sleeting, it was just miserable. So it was a little bit easier to think, say goodbye to where we'd been and head back to Churchill. Churchill's long been known as the polar bear capital of the world. It was built directly on the main migration path for the bears as they tried to go back out to the sea ice in October and November. And they still continue to pass through the town. What used to happen was they would come and sort of forage around in the town's garbage dump, which was on the outskirts of the town. It was great to have the bears there as far as a tourist draw, but it did begin to become a fairly dangerous situation. So they knew they had to do something about it. So now they got rid of the dump. There's no longer an outside dump there. They built a special indoor waste management facility, so all the waste from the town now goes inside into this facility. And so there's nothing like that to attract the bears. They still come through. I mean, you still go to Churchill and see bears, but not quite as many and not quite as sort of in such a concentrated way. If there is a problem bear, they have polar bear jail, more properly called the polar bear holding facility. And this is where problem bears are isolated and confined. This was the whole thing. You can see it's been painted. I'll mention this again in a minute. There was a local art festival, and this was one of the buildings that they painted. I just thought that was really cool. So did this lady in the corner, who was on our trip. So they trap them these days in these humane barrel traps. They used to use these old traps, which were truly vicious. Sometimes they got a wire around the bear's neck and it was choked to death, or they'd get all these hooks would go into its skin. These are now banned. They're not allowed to use them. So they trap them in these barrel traps, and they take them into the polar bear jail, and they're kept there in isolation for a month. And the bears at this time, remember, they're not feeding. They're in what's called walking hibernation. So they don't feed. All they do is they will drink or they'll eat snow for moisture. And so while they're in this facility, that's all they get. They get water and snow, and they're just kept there in isolation for a month. At the end of a month, they call in a veterinarian who sedates each one of them. They check them out make sure they're healthy, and then they get airlifted out by helicopter to some remote location where they're set free. Churchill is truly for the bears. I mean, all the Arctic wildlife, but particularly for the bears. But Churchill is definitely not for the faint of heart. I think it takes a special kind of fortitude to live up there. The town's permanent population is about 850 people. You know, it's cold most of the year. There's no way to reach the town by road. You know, I don't know, I just don't think it's for everybody. There really is only one road in Churchill, one paved road. It starts on one edge of town, it goes right through the middle of town out to the airport, and that's it. End to end, and no more paving. The town started life as a trading post. It was owned by the Hudson Bay Trading Company. Today, tourism and ecotourism are the mainstays of Churchill, but it's also an important shipping point for Western Canada grain. The grain arrives by rail, and then it's shipped from there all around the world. Challenge with that is that several years ago, the rail line was destroyed by flooding, some severe flooding in that part of the world, and the track was completely washed out for miles, and it took them well over a year to repair it. So meanwhile, there was no way of getting there other than plane. And the community began to feel really isolated and sort of trapped and forgotten there. So they thought, what can we do? So they started something called the Seawalls Mural Project. And they called in 18 international artists and asked them to come to town, and each one of them was given a building and said, paint a mural. Anything you like, paint a big mural. And so that's what they did. The idea was to bring hope to them. They were feeling abandoned by the rest of Canada. So the idea was to sort of try and lift the spirits. They could paint whatever they wanted. And so I've just got a couple of pictures. You saw the polar bears, the polar bear jail. That was one of the murals that was done. This is another one. This one was really cool. When you stood in front of it, it's a really 3D effect. It looks like the guy is walking out of the building along a rail track. It's quite amazing. Some of them would go back to sort of First Nations lore and use that as the basis for the inspiration for their paintings. They were all over town. They were really quite amazing. Yeah, they don't have beaches at Churchill. This is the Miss Piggy plane wreck. It's quite famous. In 1979, an overloaded cargo plane took off. But one engine failed, so the pilots tried to get back to the airport. They didn't make it, and they crashed on these huge big rocks. You can see some of the big rocks there. I mean, it's really amazing that nobody was killed or even seriously injured. And the town thought, well, what do we do about it now? And they were going to remove it, but then they figured it was too expensive, not worth the effort, so they just left it. And it's become a kind of quirky tourist attraction now to go see it. And it's been used for a couple of films. It's been used as a film set, and you can see it's been painted. Yeah, so it's just another odd thing that you see if you go to Churchill. There's a large research center in Churchill, and for northern studies. They have investigations of the tundra, the Arctic ecosystem, and the indigenous wildlife. And this particular indigenous wildlife was absolutely refused to have his photograph taken. He would not look at us. We waited and waited, and he just stayed turned away. He wasn't going to have his picture taken no matter what. So I had to grab a couple off the internet just so you could actually see that they do have a face. Again, not my photograph. We were there at the wrong time of year. At certain times of the year, there are just a huge number of belugas gather near Churchill. And beluga, I don't know if any of you have seen belugas or been up there for this. You can go out kind of kayaking with the belugas. Belugas are very, very curious and they're very friendly. They love to kind of see what else is on or in the water, and they'll come right up to the boats and let you talk to them. We didn't see any because we were there at the wrong time of year, but it's a very popular thing to do, I guess, if you go there at the right time.
When were you there?
Just about 6 months ago, beginning of October last year.
Of October?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So these are pictures from the company we traveled with. They tease you on their website. Oh, come and see the bears. Come and see how close you can get. This would have been great. We didn't get these pictures. I wish we had. I don't regret going, because even though we didn't get these pictures, we had some amazing experiences. It was a great trip. We got to walk with polar bears. We got some really close encounters with wolves. We saw lots of interesting birds. We saw the northern lights. And we experienced a remote environment that has remained essentially unchanged for thousands and thousands of years. Would we go back? You bet. I'll answer any questions if anybody has anything. If you have a question, they'd ask if you come to the microphone.
Presentation. There is a question on Zoom.
Okay.
They want to know, what do the wolves eat in that area?
Wolves will eat absolutely anything they can get their hands on. They are omnivorous and they're opportunistic feeders. Mostly they're looking for meat, like any canine. They will hunt the caribou, moose, if they can get them, particularly youngsters, and like the snowshoe hares, they're right down to mice and moles and voles and things like that. They will eat anything they can get. The berries, fruit off some of the little bushes. They don't specialize particularly.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anything else at the moment, but there was a question from Pam, or a comment. Great pictures, and thank you very much.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Anybody in the room have a question? No? All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I enjoyed seeing it again.